ANC is preparing to approach the Constitutional Court to prevent the DA from accessing its Cadre Deployment Policy documents. Both the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal have dealt the governing party a huge legal blow, ruling that the documents must be availed to the official opposition. For more on this, we're now joined by political analyst Dr Ongama Mtimka. Good to have you, sir, and thank you very much for your time. And first and foremost, do you think there is a file sitting with Cadre deployment decisions that the ANC could possibly just take the file and give it to the DA and say, this is where we made these decisions?
That's quite interesting. It seems to me that back in the Zondo Commission, the ANC failed to respond to the request for these minutes, saying that they were non-existent. Now, later on, I was actually focusing on my studies, and I don't remember whether they ended up, in fact, furnishing the commission with those. But if my memory serves me well, they had said there were no records at all. I remember the head of the commission actually appalled by such a fact.
Yeah. They are now deciding to go to the Constitutional Court, and we are going to appeal against a lower court ruling on its controversial Cadre deployment policy, which is said to be one of the foundations of corruption and efficiency. They're making this now a constitutional matter. How do we make it a constitutional matter?
It's quite interesting. So the party has a right to privacy, but also as a private organization, but also it was very clear in its presentation at the Zondo Commission that in fact its private processes affected the deployment of people, the employment of people in senior offices within the state. Both President Cyril Ramaphosa and then chairperson of the party, current chairperson of the party, Gwede Mantashe, were on record saying cringe-worthy things about how the Cadre deployment was applied in such a way that if you were listening to it as an independent person, it was cringe-worthy because they were admitting to subjecting processes of government in recruitment to the processes of the ANC. For example, they stated that the ANC would be consulted before, a minister went out in public to start a recruitment process. It would express its wishes. Then an advert would go out, people respond. But before an appointment got made, I think it was Gwede Mantashe who confirmed that the party was apprised of that fact and its opinion solicited. For me, that was outrageous that they could even admit to such a process existing. The second aspect to this, Thabo, is that the DA in pursuing this case wants to show that the party was more complicit in more direct ways, or in fact enabled in more direct ways the capturing of the state, and not just, by sins of omission or failing to hold President Zuma and his lieutenants accountable. It seeks to show that, in fact, the party itself was a player in enabling that capture of state institutions. And for that reason, those records become of public interest indeed.
So the president, even at the Zondo Commission, as much as he was mumbling around this issue, not quite clear, what he did admit was that the Cadre deployment policy was badly implemented. So the people who were appointed in some instances were actually not supposed to have been appointed. However, there were people who were appointed that would have worked well and should have been appointed. So does the fact that those appointments could have affected the functioning of state-owned institutions which serve the people make that a constitutional question?
That's interesting. So maybe let me just talk to the issue first. That latter one, it would be interesting for me as to how it gets to be. And in fact, there are some ways in which it does. The first one has got to do with the fact that the processes of recruiting at the level of the state are open processes, or purportedly open processes, in terms of which the integrity of the process is in whether or not those who ultimately get employed from open recruitment processes are those that deserve to be employed on the basis of merit, or in fact those aligned to the party, which then brings in political affiliation, which is not something that should be done in a democracy. In fact, author Francis Fukuyama writes in Political Development and Political Decay that when political systems determine distribution outcomes, or who gets what, when, and how, on the basis of friendship and kinship, that begins a process of bringing in traditional elements of decision-making, things that are actually relics of societies that are governed by kings or monarchies. And he contrasts that with societies that are supposedly developed, in terms of which distribution outcomes are influenced only by merit and not by friendship or kinship. And so he calls it political decay or repatrimonialization, when you find that in an advanced democracy, people want to determine things on the basis of friendship and kinship. And in fact, in this instance, cadership would be falling in line with friendship. And the issue also that should be borne in mind is that many a municipality have collapsed as a result of wishes by regional chairpersons or regional leaders to impose on the administration particular candidates to serve as municipal managers or city managers and Section 57 directors, which has been a challenge and has brought municipalities to their knees. Because once you are able to employ people depending on political alliances, then you make those people above administrative processes, such that they fail to respond to their direct line manager because they've got political protection. So in that way, whether it be executives in state-owned enterprises or directors general or executive directors at municipal level, cadre deployment does have a crippling effect on service delivery, because people who know that they depend on politicians to survive perform less, because they know that it's not whether or not they perform that determines whether they retain office.
It would be, I suppose, the president setting a decision if the Concord were to, I suppose, support this view that the public has a constitutional right inherent in our constitution, right to know the contents of all cadre deployment records. Not only for the ANC, I suppose, it would mean for even the Democratic Alliance itself, where it governs in the Western Cape.
Absolutely. And the issue here is not whether or not parties have a right to influence, parties pursue, or in companies, for example, they would call it strategic fit. And within the framework of our constitution, a governing party is able to ensure that its manifesto, which are the promises that it makes to voters, is made into government, to get into government programs. And it goes without saying that they would want people who are progressive and can take their ideas forward once they get into government. The challenge is to corrupt processes through these cadre deployment processes, because as it happens, people who get to be recruited on the basis of cadre deployment, in my view, are more likely to pay allegiance to their political principles per se than the programs themselves. So, for example, if there's agreement about a need, for example, to say industrialize or to foster development, when it comes to practice, you will find that it is not the principle of development or the principle of transformation that becomes a guide in terms of who should get what, when, and how, but particular people, particular programs that get to benefit politicians in dubious ways. So when you create an environment in which people get to be loyal to warm bodies rather than principles, as it happens with cadre deployment, you are corrupting state processes and institutions.
Ongama Mtimka, as always, much appreciated. Thanks so much for coming on. That's Dr. Ongama Mtimka there with some analysis.